I like to go through. And certainly one of my kind of many philosophies on working with players is really what's more important, really what you guys wish to learn or what I want to teach. And that's something which I think also needs to come across in educational workshops. I think it's much more important what you would want to learn for 2 days rather than what I would like to maybe kind of share. So, I mean, any questions, please just throw golf balls, do what you need to do, and I'll gladly, obviously, let this chap come in. No, good morning, take your time. So you've missed absolutely nothing. He's even bought me a sandwich, beautiful. And so, yeah, please kind of hands up, and we can gladly go through any areas you want. But really on that kind of subject, let me get out of the way so you can all see, really some kind of main areas to really discuss today. It's great obviously having the physios here as well, so we can no doubt really connect it back to, for the kind of trainers perhaps in the room, the physiotherapist example. Really kind of what is posture, or the kind of human frame that we have, and I'll kind of read this, but no doubt you can read that as we go through. Kind of what is it, and really how does it really influence kind of how we move. So it's interesting that how most of us are sat currently, which we'll come on to at great length throughout this morning, and tomorrow. So really the influences, as I say, these very kind of inactive kind of postures that we have, and these very kind of sedate postures that we have, and much of that then really can migrate and display into their golf swing. One final thing before I go to, I actually learned this a long time ago when I first started to kind of speak outside of England. English people talk very fast. So if I go too quick, again, this is me going in very slow motion this morning. So if I'm going too quickly, then please still tell me. So I will do my best to remind myself to go super slow and just keep it at a pretty, all okay, level-wise, and beautiful. So really, what is posture? What is it? How do we become aware of it? How do we use it? And really, how does it connect back to what we do in golf? Because the basis of really human movement within the golf swing is kind of how we move around these frames that we have. So, and we'll hopefully share some really nice case studies, really looking at the scale of players I can only imagine that most you work with. So from the very kind of young, kind of pre-adolescent players perhaps, so the really kind of the young, males and females, and then the slightly more kind of established, perhaps more kind of mature athletes, those probably north of, say, 40, for example. So some really kind of nice case studies that, and I'm very big on this, that when we're doing these things is how do we help and really develop people with no systems. I'm obviously very lucky with the 3D systems that we use, but how can you still really apply these approaches when it's just you and the player? And that's something we'll spend a lot of time on as we move through these kind of 2 days. You don't need any system to kind of do this stuff. It's just you and the player and just the hopefully information that you now have. And then I've been living in the US now for some time, and we've just actually moved back to England in the last kind of 4 weeks. And I've kind of put this one in because it's such a big area, certainly within kind of golf education, in golf coaching currently, that the idea of rotation, it seems to be a word that really comes out pretty much in every session that I'm around, and I'm sure with the 2 case studies, the 2 live sessions we have this afternoon, and actually speaking with UC, who I spoke with UC at length this morning, pretty much came out, I think, in every session that he did recently, when I couldn't unfortunately make it 2 weeks ago. So really, what is rotation? What are the considerations that we have to allow for? And then, what influences really how we rotate and move so well as we do in swing. And I think the important thing to remember is that every single movement in life, with the exception of 1 or 2, is a rotation. This is rotation. That's rotation. Everything is a rotational movement, just in what direction. So there's not really, apart from maybe a few, every single movement we make within golf is one of rotation. But yes, it's more kind of informally kind of known as this stuff. But how the wrist moves, how the kind of forearm moves, how the shoulder joints move, they are all very much rotational movements. And then again, this is very much based on, so you can blame UC for this, so very much get this on camera, and very much kind of based on some of UC's feedback from what we experienced and certainly what we observed back in March when working with the national players back then. I thought it'd be nice to then really go through more anatomically within golf, how can each kind of segment move. So to give you some kind of nice references in many ways, of say how the pelvis can move, how lower limb can move, how the spine produces rotation, hand and wrist. So we'll try and give you some nice examples of those again, and then some case studies, and then some live sessions. So that will hopefully tire you out in a good way throughout today, and kind of give you lots of things to play with. And then tomorrow we're going to some kind of different things like distance and how do we gain length and pain and that kind of stuff. So hopefully a very kind of diverse kind of 2 days. So this is kind of one of my favorite kind of images to use that, or is it? I think we're actually devolving as human beings now. I think we've gone through that lovely evolutionary phase, and I think we're actually at the stage now of devolution. I think man or woman kind of reached their peak probably about, 50 years ago perhaps. So we're actually now going for that kind of slightly devolved, regressive, unfortunately, sorry guys, and we can change it. And so for me, this is a wonderful image that we can hopefully all relate to. We've kind of gone back to being the caveman in some ways again. And just because of life and the fact we're sat down and what have you. It's just the way it is, but there's nothing we really can kind of work around there. So I've kind of put this in because it really is a theme that will really run through the kind of 2 days. That when you look at actually what human movement is, it's simply how we interact with gravity. That's all movement ever is. How do we as the humans, for example, how you guys are sat now and how I'm kind of walking around, it really is just how we as human beings really interact and kind of negotiate and really kind of play with gravity. So when we have these kind of very sat positions, and we'll try and get you to stand up as much as you can. Apologies for that, for being active. And I know many people come to these things just to go for 2 days, so I'll do my best to keep you kind of as involved and active and jumping around and doing backflips and handstands throughout the day. So really is gravity now kind of starting to win. And kind of really, how do we know that? I think I've kind of put this hopefully up here pretty quickly. Is when we kind of lose that wonderful elasticity or kind of freedom of movement. That's when we pretty much know that gravity is starting to win here. So is anyone happy being a model for me? Anyone like to kind of stand up and, I should pick on my physio friend, but no, you're good. You can just enjoy the coffee and chill. Anyone like to have a little playful, a fun way of doing this is, can you even kind of sit down and stand up with kind of no hands? So when you kind of lose that wonderful kind of elastic, and I'm old and slow and a bit creaky today, so apologies for that bad example, but when we kind of lose the ability to kind of move this way, that's when we start to know that kind of maybe gravity's starting to beat us now. So even very playful, very childlike in some ways. I'm very fortunate I have a 2-year-old daughter that does that just embarrassingly well. And just as she kind of moves through life and we kind of lose that wonderful kind of freedom of movement, that when we kind of lose the ability to kind of move that way, it's a pretty good indication that, maybe we need to start to look at this stuff. So that's normally when people stand up and sit up straight now. And but again, this is just the kind of the world that we're kind of living in, and we're going to really kind of hopefully tell this kind of nice story. And third, as you kind of run through these kind of next kind of few days, that a lot of kind of spinal or postural adaptations or kind of damage that we really are exposed to just comes from being kind of like we are here. And this is, we'll talk about posture in a bit more detail in a second. Still, I think the most influential and our most kind of dominant posture that we have is the one that we're simply not aware of. So we can all kind of stand well and be very aware of, in our start positions and lovely long necks and lovely kind of decompressed spines and wonderful kind of shoulder blade and scapular position. That's all very, very good. But if we live in these very kind of adaptive positions because of life for X amount of hours in a day, we're kind of always losing that kind of slight battle. So for me, it's still the most realistic way of defining posture. The most influential posture that we have is the one that we're simply not aware of standing or sitting in. Now, why is it really so important? Let me just put this down for 1 second. And we can all actually probably stand up shortly, so you can kind of stay seated for some long. It's actually been probably my main kind of research project this year, during obviously the delights of lockdowns in various constraints around the world. These real kind of key and very kind of dominant links and threads that we have between those adapted frames that we all have. I mean, how many of us are absolutely like where you would want us to be? Probably, if any. If you look hard enough, you'll find something. So no one's ever that good. You can really get into some very precise stuff. And why posture is so important is because a lot of what we do in transition, so when you kind of move in transition, so from kind of back to down, so which we'll come on to a lot more tomorrow, whatever imbalances we have. So for example, I have a really bad right shoulder. My right shoulder lives a bit like this for many reasons. Or someone's a bit kind of forward in neck, or someone's a bit kind of adapting the pelvis. So when you move in transition and you expose the body in many ways to huge, insignificant amounts of force, typically it will pull us towards and deform us towards that dominant posture that we have. So much of what you see in transition with players, so for example, I mean, people kind of move this way or people kind of move this way. When you really kind of put your foot down in some ways and really accelerate really quite dramatically and quite powerfully in transition, you will typically be pulled towards that dominant frame that you kind of live in, really. So it'd be interesting with the players we have this afternoon and tomorrow that if we start to observe these kind of just very evident and very visible adjustments that they have, and then start to relate that back to why they do what they do in transition. There's many other reasons as why you move in transition the way that you do, as we'll come on to a lot more tomorrow mid-morning. But there's a very, very kind of clear connection, a very clear thread, and that has really been the basis of a lot of kind of work and research I've done this year. But to really understand why you move that way in transition, just simply look at how people stand. Is that very kind of playful, slightly observational approach you can take. So if someone lives a bit like this, so typically kind of teenage boys are just terrible, bless them. It's not fair, Dad. That's kind of how they stand because that's just where they're at in life. It's another reason why many of them kind of move this way. Often, the more, I'm 46 and old and slow, so people my generation can get a bit kind of this way through life. It's then really not unusual to see people kind of moving kind of that way in transition, and vice versa. You're looking at, say, some of the younger ladies that we saw back in March, that often some of the kind of adaptations some of the younger females have, again, can very much explain and relate back to why they do what they do in the swing. Why don't we stand up? You've been sat down for 20 minutes. That's way too long for me. Tomorrow there's no chairs allowed. We're going to sit cross-legged on the floor and roll around. And is that okay? Can we do that? No chairs and just get them to sit, and we'll have a competition who can sit in that position the longest. I mean, just kind of almost be aware that kind of really how you stand as far as kind of hands in funny positions or slightly compressed on one side or whatever it might be. Just start to, even at this stage, just start to kind of make some little rotations and some movements. I know you're all a bit stiff this morning, but nobody's judging you. Not really. And then just start to maybe observe that kind of how you move and how you rotate may just connect back to some of those little dominant positions that you have. And we're going to play with this in a second as well, so just get the sort of references. Where's Henrique gone? We should do this to music, I think. That'd be a much better way of doing this. And is it too early for that in Finland? Okay, but just to play with these now, if everyone goes into their start position, really kind of pushes their head a long way forward, so really kind of shove that chin forwards, kind of point your nose up to the sky. So don't worry, no one's watching you. So really into that position. Now make some rotations from that position, which is not unusual for most of us to live. It's interesting, I've done 2 flights in the last kind of 10 days and haven't really flown since I got back from the States. And it's remarkable just how bad I feel for flying again. That I used to fly pretty much every week, and it reminds you that just sitting on a plane for even for London yesterday, you just feel a bit kind of that way. Another very common one we have on this one, if everyone lets their kind of rib cage really shift to the left. Is there any left-handed players in the room? There's always one, in a good way. Do it the other way, so kind of shift your rib cage a long way that way. If everyone kind of shifts their rib cage left and takes their start position again, just kind of once more make some little rotations from kind of these positions. Just start to really, I think, try and connect in many ways but that when you stand in these positions, how it really starts to influence kind of how we rotate, how we move. You guys move pretty good, actually, so this is making it easy for me. And we could do 100 of these, but just really the importance of that kind of wonderfully long kind of posture we have. So kind of commands, or certainly references I try and give most of the guys, are that the idea of that kind of lovely long neck, kind of nose forwards, kind of wide rib cage. So I kind of call it, it's like the American football pad posture, kind of lovely wide rib cages, wide shoulders, kind of nose forwards, long necks. So in some ways, without kind of lifting the chin, whatever height you are, be almost a centimeter taller. So you can really kind of push up through the skull without lifting the chin. So kind of chin down, nose forwards. On that lovely in-breath that you have, so you really kind of expand, kind of using that diaphragm, which we're going to a bit more tomorrow, expand that rib cage, and as you kind of exhale out, keeping that wonderfully kind of expanded rib cage, wide shoulders. Now into that start position. Just start to make some rotations from that lovely, almost inflated position. And again, just start to reference, again, what that means to you to kind of move that way. So I try and give you, as best I can, many kind of playful ways of doing this, but that's one of my favorite ones. Of whatever height you are, where's Henrique gone? Oh, he's outside, I think. Do you work in feet and inches or centimeters in Finland? Damn. What am I in centimeters? I don't know, one something. I'm 5'8" on a good day in England. Always be that kind of centimeter taller, but without, so very much pushing up through the skull, wide rib cages, lovely long necks. There's even playful ways you can do that, which we'll do a lot more this afternoon. You can sit down again now. It's where some of these, I don't know if you get these older expressions in Finland, the idea of kind of being light on your feet. Do you get that one in Finland? A lot of the kind of teenage kids in England are very good at walking like the Grim Reaper, bless them. And so a lot of that kind of idea of being light on your feet comes in that wonderful, lovely kind of tall posture and whatnot. It's interesting, Henrique and I were discussing the Masters before we kind of started today, and he kind of mentioned Rory and DJ. There's a reason why, many reasons why they are two of the most powerful players that we have. They are also two of the best walkers. You actually look at kind of how they walk, their gait cycles, that wonderful walking, that kind of wonderful rotation in their pelvis. They make kind of great kind of Western kind of gunslingers, these guys. So often just looking at how people walk, which is almost the expansion of kind of how we stand, really is connects back to them why these guys are so powerful. So just walking at people's kind of gait cycles, looking at how they walk, can really be very revealing to any imbalances they may have and then why they move the way they do. So I said there's many reasons why DJ and Rory are so powerful, one of them being they're probably just the best walkers that I've seen. That wonderful kind of elastic kind of spring that they have. And a lot of it just comes back to really kind of how we stand. So typically if you stand well and walk well, you've got a good chance of being okay. Unfortunately, most of us kind of stand badly and kind of walk a bit funny. So if you're going to take nothing from these next 2 days, just stand great and walk well, hold a few putts, and life's easy. At least I hope so. Okay, so just to kind of, again, give that kind of thread around really today, that in many ways you can kind of look at the body a bit like that these wonderful kind of connected parts that we have. And I kind of use these phrases here that really, when looking at how we move, and this is going to really make such a theme and such a dominant connection back to a lot of the kind of case studies that we go through today, and also the live sessions that we'll do, which will make up much of the afternoon session today and tomorrow's. When looking at kind of movement, when looking at certainly the golf swing, for example, one of the things I really try and encourage most people to look at is when you start to observe how people move in their swing. And especially when you're exposed to lots of information these days, and I'm big on this in many ways, the last thing golf needs is more information. We don't understand the information that we currently have to anywhere great enough level. So until we really, to a level of real mastery for me, really understand the information we currently have, the last thing we need in golf is any more information. because we simply don't understand great enough what we currently have. But when you expose all this information of, launch monitors and force and pressure plates and 3D motion capture systems and statistics programs, that kind of stuff, the reality within movement is this: there's normally something somewhere rather than many things in many places. And that is really the basis for me of kind of why I had a discussion with a guy yesterday in the US, and this guy's a good player. He's won several major championships in the last kind of few years, so a good player. And his response, this guy's now got 5, 6, 7 things wrong. I said, he hasn't. It's a really, I think, very harmful, very unhelpful a way of seeing movement. I said, typically there's something somewhere that creates many adaptations, many responses, and many adjustments. That's a much more realistic and much more accurate way of kind of seeing movement. The idea of having multiple things wrong is simply not true. There's normally something somewhere that we've just found many, many ways of moving around. So to get better all this over here, we just got to get it better that one thing over here. And that really is still, I think, one thing which hopefully for those guys that were able to watch and observe the sessions we did back in March, it was, let's just do that one thing well. And invariably, when you get this, you'll get better at most of this stuff over here. But I think certainly in golf in recent times, it's been more around, my launch, my club delivery's off, and my ball flight's this, and I got pain in my wrist, and my distance is down. Like, no. It's normally there's something somewhere that makes us kind of move in these ways, not many, many things in many places. And it really connects back to kind of why I've kind of put this little image up here, that everything within movement connects to everything, so therefore everything will simply affect everything. I mean, even going into some kind of slightly kind of deeper levels now, that because of all the tissue connections we have in our system, all the soft tissues that we have, literally when our toes move, so do our eyebrows, to be very precise. We won't do that as a practical example, so don't worry. So when we move our toes around, our eyebrows move, and on a much more, a much deeper level, it's very, very true. Even if I just move my collar, every single atom in my shirt will move to let that collar move and behave that way. And that is the reality of human movement. The idea of moving things independently, the idea of kind of segments moving separately, I mean, it's simply not possible. So even when you move the fingers, the toes are moving, the shoulders respond, and the pelvis is moving, the knees are doing adapt in that way. So that is the basis of kind of movement, which we'll come into hopefully a lot again in the live sessions later, that when we start looking at all these very visible things that we can see, the club's moving that way, and the pelvis moves that way, and the launch monitor says this, and force plate say that, and 3D says this, and my wrist, no. And I'd really encourage you to kind of see it that way. So, before we go any further, everyone kind of happy and pretty kind of comfortable with that really the basis of really everything we do in golf, and we're going to really go into some different areas tomorrow, more around the neurological system, the brain. So we'll start to connect up really how the brain and the human kind of interact, not that you can ever separate them, but so we'll spend a bit more time tomorrow around things like concepts and perceptions, and there's really two things that control what we do within movement: anatomy and memory. And we spend a bit of time tomorrow talking about how really influential our memories are and why we do what we do in golf. Those historical memories you have often go back to day one, and kind of what you first watched and what you first read and who you listened to and who that dominant coach was in a good way when you were, in my case, as a 13-year-old years ago. But really the basis of everything we do today within how we move in golf is kind of how we move around this kind of frame that we have. So many things are resolved normally just by when you stand well, invariably you kind of typically move well. And vice versa, when you stand poorly, good luck moving well from that position. So if you do nothing else apart from stand great, then I think you're in a pretty cool place then.